Hello and welcome to Fairly Critical's review of Don't Worry, Darling, a movie about a housewife living the idealized late 50s, early 60s life before she starts to believe that everything is not as it seems, and it is in fact very, very wrong. I am your host, Jacob, and I am sorry for missing last week. I was recovering from a cold and didn't have my voice. I still really haven't gotten I've gotten most of my voice back, but I'm still missing part of my voice, so I apologize if I stop to take a drink or anything like that. But like I said, I am sorry for missing last week. I was really hoping to get to go see and review The Woman King, but hopefully maybe it'll come out on a streaming service and I'll get to do it then, because that movie looked really, really good. But thank you guys for watching. Let's begin. As always, we'll start by looking at the acting talent. Florence Pugh gives an all-star performance, as she always does. I haven't seen her in anything that was bad at all. She's phenomenal. This is actually the second film in which she starred with Chris Pine. They did a movie on Netflix called The Outlaw King, which I highly recommend you go watch. In that movie, they're married and she's supporting him, Chris Pine, as the good-natured king of Scotland. In this movie, she and he are on the opposite side of the spectrum, with Chris Pine giving a sultry villain in this film. He's very charismatic, he's very arrogant, and I love him. He has just this sense of control throughout the entirety of the film, right up until the end, that just really supports the narrative perfectly. It's just the right amount of disturbing to support the story that the movie wants to provide. Gemma Chan plays a supporting role as Chris Pine's wife. Her talents are impressive, even if her character in this film kind of confuses me, but we'll talk more about that in the spoiler section. Olivia Wilde plays the supporting role as Pugh's best friend, and also pulls double duty as the director. Her acting talents are well known and appreciated. There's really no reason to disagree with that in this film either. We'll talk more about her directing in a minute. But of course, let's get to Harry Styles first. Harry Styles plays the leading role as the husband of Florence Pugh in this film. And he is the weakest link in the cast. That's not to say that he does a bad job, because he does. He does a very good job. But he lacks an amount of subtlety in his acting, specifically with a lack of facial expressions in key emotional moments. When he's feeling confused or angry or sad or hopeful or joy or something like that, you largely get a sense of it. It's just there's little extra that's missing that you kind of like, oh, okay, I think you're happy. I see that you're happy. But I don't feel that you're happy. Again, by no means is his performance bad. It's just when you put him up side by side with powerhouses like Wilde and Pugh and Pine, the discrepancy is noticeable. As for directing, I'm kind of torn on this one. On one hand, you have a very well edited, well shot film that achieves a really high level of visual storytelling. You have needle drops that were largely diegetic to the scenes that they were in, screen flashes that turned the picturesque view of suburbia into an uneasy feeling of dread throughout the film. But on the other hand, you had a second act that really kind of seemed to go on forever, and story elements that aren't cleanly tied off by the resolution of the plot. And some of these story elements, which we'll discuss in greater detail in the spoiler section, are easily tied into the resolution. Some are definitely not, and others are just kind of ambiguous, enough that it could be or could not be based on your interpretations of the resolution. But like I said, we'll go into that in the spoiler section more. As for the screenplay, I really liked this screenplay a lot. The story itself is strong, and the dialogue between the characters feels really natural. The dynamics between them all play well together. It is a movie that I think shares a lot of viewpoints with The Invitation, politically speaking, but did a lot better at sharing those viewpoints and letting you make up your own mind, where The Invitation kind of told you what to think. If you watched my review over The Invitation, I thought its politics were very heavy-handed, and that actually damaged the story. In this film, it doesn't do that. It is still a little heavy-handed, but it's far more clever and provides a far greater level of tact with its scenes and its symbolism and its characters than The Invitation ever did. So it's far superior. Again, the resolution of the film is a little murky with regard to how it ties some of the plot points together. It is difficult to say how much of that is due to plot and screenplay, and how much of that is due to Wilde's choice of symbolism and or editing scenes for time. Theoretically, some of the questions that I have about the story were answered by scenes that were left on the editing room floor. If that is the case, and it just kind of comes down to a director's choice and not necessarily a screenplay fault. I don't know where to place the blame for that one, but it is kind of an issue. Things that were good about it, though, costume and set designs worked perfectly. The bright colors of the dresses and the vehicles and the suburban life worked perfectly with the fantasy life of the 50s and 60s. That the film wanted to portray for the most part, and then it was offset perfectly with the dreary, dark tones of modern day society, which you see in kind of flashback, flash forward sequences. So it was very well designed in that regard. There were some visual effects that you could definitely tell were computer generated. There aren't a lot of pieces of the movie that have a lot of CG work to them. It is largely shot without computer generation, at least as far as I can tell. But the ones that did have CG in them are very noticeable. And it's not great. You can definitely tell that it's not real. But all in all, this is a good movie. We'll discuss its faults in greater detail in the spoiler section, but my wife and I thoroughly enjoyed it. This is the first movie we've gotten to go see together. Actually, no, that's not true. Not since I started this channel. We went and saw Bullet Train together. This is the first one though that we've gone to go see since we had our daughter. So it was a nice evening. Sorry, that's personal. It has nothing to do with the review, but it was a very nice evening, and both her and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even if we got in the car and started to think about it for more than 30 seconds and started ripping into some of the questions that we had on the way home. But I think it left itself open for a sequel, and I would go see that. I would be looking forward to go see a sequel. With regards to the ambiguous scenes, I said there were some that didn't work, some that did, and some that may or may not have. If all of the ones that may or may not have fit in some way, I'm sorry, let me rephrase it. If all the ones that could or could not fit they do fit some way, and I'm just not understanding it, I would say that the movie deserves to be an 8. So if you guys go see the movie and you pick up on some of the scenes and the meanings of some of the ambiguous ones, ambiguity to it, and you want to let me know, please do so, because I'd love to give this movie a higher rating than I ultimately do. But if those if the ambiguity of those scenes doesn't end up fitting with the movie, it probably deserves to be a 6, just because those ultimately become useless and a waste of time. Time which could have been edited out of the second act to move it along a little bit quicker. But because enough of the scenes that I'm talking about could definitely fit, or at least could possibly fit, I'm going to go ahead and give this movie a 7 out of 10. It is a good film. Pugh's amazing. Pine is amazing. Wilde gives a great performance, even if we're kind of wondering about directing a little bit. Styles is good, if not great. Gemma Chan also adds some value to it. The other supporting cast members, all of it's good. If you don't want any spoilers, please turn away now. Go see the film. Come back and finish this video. If you don't care about spoilers or you've already seen the film, we're going to go and talk about this movie in greater detail. If you are leaving us, though, thank you for blessing us with your attention for this long. Please hit that like and subscribe button. It means a lot to the channel. And please join us next week or go through our older videos. We do full movie reviews, industry analysis, and character comparisons. And we'll continue to do so every other week. So we'll be back next week. Thank you very much. The spoiler section begins now. Okay, spoiler warning given. We're in the spoiler section now. So let's talk about kind of those scenes that I consider to be ambiguous. And am I not saying that right? Ambiguous, I think is the real word. Yeah, this is why I got a math degree in college and not an English degree. Let's talk about those scenes though. So this is kind of a mystery thriller movie. Part of a mystery thriller is introducing clues that something isn't right, letting the main character and therefore the audience kind of figure that out. In this movie, the clues come in the form of the plane that only she sees, and I've got a list here, so I'm just going to go through this list. So it's the plane that only she sees, eggs without anything in them, the earthquakes, the officials that cover up her friend's death, the redacted medical report, the visions of dancers, and the iris and everything, the hallucinations of the wall pushing into her, her friend in the ballet studio, the saran wrap suffocation, those three hallucinations, and the scripted memories of that all the couples have, and finally the gaslighting by her husband and ultimately her friend. So some of these easily fit with the resolution that she's stuck in a program, right? So that's the resolution. Her husband knew about this all, and he's in on it, and she's in a simulation. The eggs, the wall hallucination, the saran wrap hallucination, the gaslighting, and the flashes of dancers all occur after she breaks free of the simulation for the first time by going to HQ. So all of those make sense. That easily ties up with the resolution. It's just, it's her unconscious processing that she is stuck in the simulation and finding with what she perceives to be reality. The eggs with nothing in them is her starting to feel like her reality is a hollow imitation. The suffocating experiences of the saran wrap and the wall pushing her up against the window are her feelings of being trapped in this in suburbia that she didn't choose to be. The flashes of dancers are, as we find out, the visual sequence used to connect her brain to the simulation, and her husband is the one putting her in the simulation. So his gaslighting makes sense. That all works. That works and works well. The one thing I can clearly point to and say doesn't work is the earthquakes. And here's why. Everyone feels them. Whether or not they realize they're in the simulation or not, everyone feels the earthquakes. Her husband, her friends, all of her friends. We know that Olivia Wilde's character knows she's in a simulation, but the other women don't, and they all react the exact same way to the earthquakes. Since all the women, everyone who's in these simulations are spread out across, the world, they're not all in one big apartment complex. A tremor in her apartment, which is what you would theoretically say is what's causing the earthquake, is there some rumbling in her apartment? It can't work, because if it's only her feeling it, it should be only her experiencing the earthquake in the simulation. But since everyone feels it and they're all spread out across different locations, that can't be it. It isn't the men leaving or exiting the simulation, because several occur when her husband is there. It is said to be something, whenever the first one hits, it's like, oh, it's the progressive materials or whatever crap that they came up with to give a reason that they have to leave for work every day. It's said to be something to do with that. But then we are told that the husband leaves the simulation to do a job in the real world, so it can't be something that they're actually working on in the simulation. So the only possible explanation is that it has something to do with the hardware of the simulation itself, like the server overheating or completing a taxing process or something like that. But it's never hinted at in the film. So it's not cleanly tied up by the resolution. It just kind of makes us wonder, what are those earthquakes about? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Another one that is more plot hole than anything else is the scripted memories. So if you are smart enough to figure out neural linguistic programming, and you are smart enough to create a reality that is a computer reality that is so accurate that it convinces the people who are in it that they're actually living their lives, but you are stupid enough to think that every couple in the simulation can be issued one of three cookie cutter simulation memories and backstories, and they're just going to be fine with that. They're not going to think anything weird. You deserve to be caught. I know it was added in there to make the dinner scene more intense, but it wasn't strictly speaking necessary, and it really gave a weakness to the Victory Project that just feels dumb and arbitrary and artificial. The cover up and the redacted medical reports are ones that I originally thought were clever, but now I'm not so sure. So when the death happens, when her friend, slits her throat and falls from the roof, the red shirts jump in so quickly that it had me actually asking if they were there the whole time, why didn't they just stop her? And it's because they weren't there the whole time. They were loaded in like the Matrix. So as soon as she killed herself, they loaded in and they took care of the situation. It's like they're security professionals. Then the doctor comes to the house and just straight shows her that he has a file labeled security threat with her friend's name on it, and turns it to her. It's very obvious that she is going to see that, which at first I thought, that's dumb. Why would you do that? She can clearly see that. But then it was so dumb that I actually convinced myself it was a trick and a trap. It was there to make, he wanted her to see it so that way she would, and then he wanted to leave his bag there so that way he could check and see if she would pull it out and see how much of a risk she was to their program. Then they go to the party in the next scene and Chris Pine begins to taunt her. Well, so they go to the party and Chris Pine and the doctor are like spying on her the whole time. And then at the dinner party, Chris Pine begins to taunt her. And I thought my suspicions of it being a trap were confirmed. I was like, it was a trap. They did it. It was a thing. And they were talking about her. But then her husband is revealed to be in on it in the resolution. And so now I'm not so sure that it was actually a clever trap, because if her husband was in on it, then they don't need to trap her. They just need to, the husband can just report back to them if she's going to be a problem. I mean, yeah, theoretically the husband could lie to them. But in the next scene after the, at the party, in the next scene after the doctor's report thing, he's promoted and legitimately proves to us, shows us that he is a dancing monkey for the Victory Project. So it's just, I'm not so sure. If it is a clever trap, it shows Chris Pine's intelligence and it's awesome. If it's not, it's just another showing of stupidity that kind of weakens the villains. So I don't know. What you guys let me know in the comments what you think. Was that a clever trap or was that stupidity? Another thing that's kind of weakened by the resolution is that party scene where Harry Styles is a dancing puppet. The scene where he's promoted specifically, he's promoted, and in that promotion, Alice runs to the bathroom and Bunny, which is Olivia Wilde's character, chastises her. And that is the all hope is lost moment. I know that she's not actually captured until the next scene when Jack rats her out, which again makes the whole medical report seem less clever and more plot hole. But it is seeing Jack fall closer and closer in line with the Victory Project and legitimately being turned into a marionette that shows just how little to no hope that she will have to leave, at least leave with him. That is compounded by Bunny joining in on gaslighting her. We're come to realize that Bunny actually knows about it and is choosing to believe and support the simulation because that means her, she can be with her kids. So her joining in on the gaslighting and calling her crazy for going to HQ and upsetting the status quo is really heart-wrenching. In an instant, she loses the two most supportive relationships that she's had in the entire film. It was an incredibly important scene. And the feelings of dread that the entire second act had been building up to was perfectly coalesced in this moment. I know that the second act, like I said, the second act doesn't technically end until the next scene when Jack rats her out and she's taken away to be brainwashed. But This is the real gut-wrenching moment of the film. Sorry. Unfortunately, the resolution in which Jack is already a willing accomplice to the program kind of undercuts this a little bit. This scene where he's dancing and all this stuff really supports a resolution that includes Jack being an unknowing puppet to the simulation, where he wasn't really the evil guy. He just was lied to the same way she was. And then he discovers it at the same time she does. It would have worked better if he discovered it at the same time she does, and then chooses to stay in the fantasy life, kind of like Olivia Wilde's character did. That would have hit harder emotionally, because instead of Jack being the true bad guy of the film, as he stole her agency and placed her in the simulation, it would have been Jack, who we still love, because remember, our POV character is Alice. So if Alice still loves him, we're supposed to still love him. And if he would choose to stay in the fantasy over leaving with her, that would have been just the ultimate gut-wrenching betrayal. I reject you for the fantasy life that I've chosen for myself. That would have been the thing. Instead, what we got is that he is the true bad guy, and instead of having a truly loving and committed relationship with her, he steals her agency and places her in the simulation and doesn't actually ask her what she would want. So it just kind of weakens what we view as a loving, committed relationship and turns it into more of a cliche one where Jack is just kind of looking out for his own self-interest at the detriment to her. It also makes the scene where he's dancing for Chris Pine something that I think we would all do, frankly. I mean, look at this man. And treats it simply as really extensive foreshadowing of the next scene. And by next scene, I mean like the very next scene. It's not particularly clever foreshadowing. It's just going to happen in 2 minutes. So something that's very confusing to me is Gemma Chan killing Chris Pine at the end, because I definitely believed that she was working with Chris Pine the entire time, but that she realizes Alice is going to escape the simulation and then she kills him. I don't fully understand why. There's a couple different possibilities here, right? One, she didn't know she was in a simulation at all, until Chris Pine got news that Alice was going to escape and she figured it out. That makes zero sense. That doesn't make sense at all. Nothing about the performance up until that point made it feel like she didn't know, and that she wasn't a willing participant, and B, somehow in control of something. So I just, let's shut that off. So that leaves us to two other possibilities. Either her character knew that she's in a simulation, and didn't support Chris Pine, but was too scared to do anything about it, or she's not only does she know she's in the simulation, but she's an active and willing partner to Chris Pine and helping him maintain the illusion, and because she's getting something from it for some reason, and offing him now gives her some strategic advantage. So let's look at the first one, the one that I think is least likely. Her not being a willing participant doesn't really make sense. She is shown as being domineering to the other women in this film and supporting Chris Pine in every shape and form. Specifically in the dining party scene where Florence Pugh's character challenges Chris Pine with the evidence that he is lying to them. Chan's portrayal of the character just never gave me the sense that she wasn't in full control of her own life. Because in that scene, instead of looking worried like the other actresses did, like her other friends were in there and they looked all worried and concerned, she just looked angry. Like she was incredulous that Florence Pugh would challenge Chris Pine in this way, because Chris Pine's created this world that gives her everything. And she knows that. And if she knows that and she's supportive of Chris Pine, it makes sense that she would be angry. Now, theoretically, you could make a mistake, or you could say that is a mistake on Chan's part in deciding how she would portray the character and not showing fear, but anger. But I would doubt that. Having seen Gemma Chan in other projects, she's pretty good. So I doubt that's her making a mistake or misunderstanding what, Olivia Wilde wanted in that moment. So if she did know that she's in a simulation and she is supporting her husband and she is, getting something from keeping these women in this fantasy world, why decide to kill her husband now of all times? My theory is that she believes Alice is going to escape and bring the real world cops into the situation. And if they get involved, then she and Chris Pine will have to abandon this fantasy life and spend the rest of their lives running in the real world. But if she kills Chris Pine and claims to be a victim, she can actually take the technology and start again with a new fantasy in which she is in control. And that's actually what my wife and I think will be the sequel. If there is a sequel, it will probably be that, like one in which the simulation participants know that they are in the fantasy, like Olivia Wilde's character, and actively choose to be there for reasons that are personal to them. And we think maybe like a journalist following Alice's story will enter the simulation thinking that all these people are being trapped, and try to save them, only for the participants to turn on the journalist and try and kill them, so that way they can remain in their fantasies. I think that could be really interesting. I'd like to see that sequel. Now we're going to talk about the message of the film. I don't normally like to get into the politics of movies. However, there are some movies where their political message is just integral in understanding the plot. And this is one of those. In fact, it shares key points with a movie that I did a review on a few weeks ago, The Invitation. So let's get into this as politely as we can. Because remember, it's politics. There's always going to be people with all different types of views, and we just have to understand that. So some of this messaging could be taken a different way. This is just how I see it, and how based on what I saw in the movie, it plays out with regard to the plot, with the plot significance. So here we go. So when Alice remembers her life in the real world and confronts Jack, Jack yells at her that he is doing this for her. He yells at her saying, she was miserable in reality, but she's happy here. And his sacrifice of going off into the real world to earn enough money to keep them in this fantasy is his sacrifice for her. Now, here's the interesting thing. He isn't wrong. By all accounts, she is legitimately happy being a housewife. She had fun being with friends. She had a man that for most of the film was shown to care for her emotional and physical well-being. I mean, even going so far as to perform certain intimate acts for her that would not bring him any immediate physical gratification. There were no concerns about money. Life seemed to be pretty perfect. It isn't until she questions this idyllic life and comes to the realization that she didn't choose to be there that it became a problem and that it became an issue. So in the memory sequence, we see that Jack is a fan of the old James Bond films. I mean, they even put a nice little nod here. His fantasy car that he drives is the same Aston Martin model that Sean Connery drives during the original Bond films. Now, while I love the original James Bond films, and I grew up watching those. My dad, when my when my mom wasn't home and it was just my dad and I and my sister would, sometimes go to bed. And if I couldn't sleep, my dad and I would watch old James Bond films because there was always at least one playing somewhere. So I love James Bond films. I do. But we need to acknowledge that there are some issues with how he viewed women. When you boil his character down, James Bond is a narcissist and a sociopath who treats women like objects and disposes of them as soon as they outserve their purpose. While most men, and I need you to understand this, so I need you to hear me now. Most men never have and never will treat women like that. But there is a certain allure to being able to get any woman that you want with just boyish charm and a witty one-liner. Okay? I hope that's not too controversial for me to say. It's a power fantasy. It doesn't happen, but it's nice to think that you could. That's all it takes for Bond. In those films, that is all that it takes for Bond to get any woman that he wants in any film. Just look at it. On the rare occasion where a woman told him no, all he had to do was keep pressuring her with some slow movement of his hands behind her back or a few extra words from his dulcet voice, and she would just simply succumb. The problem is that is fantasy. It is a fantasy built by Hollywood over decades that men who either didn't understand women or didn't think too highly of them adopted as the reality. Similar to this film. That's the whole point of this film. Instead of no meaning no, it was really a woman checking to see how persistent you would be. If you want a film that shows the proper kind of persistence, watch Heath Ledger in A Knight's Tale. It's it's either 2000 or 2001 that A Knight's Tale comes out, and it is a great film, especially his character and how he woos his female partner. So when rejected by a woman in that film, he strikes up another conversation with her at another appropriate time, learns how to dance, listens to her wishes, writes her love poems, albeit with a lot of help from his friends, and eventually earns her love. That is persistence. That is the proper persistence when talking about relationships. It is not them saying no so you can push them up against the wall and show them your manliness. And I laugh at that, but that's tragic, because that's rape. One of, if not the most vile things that you can ever subject another person to. It tells a person that they no longer have agency over an act that is the most emotionally, physically, and spiritually intimate experience we can ever share with another human being. Now, I'm not going so far as to saying that Jack is raping Alice every time that they are intimate in the program. That's not what I'm saying. But he does steal her agency in the real world when he places her in the program. He didn't approach her honestly and tell her about the program and invite her to come with him. No, he took her choice from her and forced her to live the fantasy with him without her knowledge. In the real world, she was a doctor, a respected position in today's society, and he was unemployed. And rather than working to solve what he didn't like about himself, he fell under the sway of a soothsayer who offered him the perfect life for him and Alice. The irony is, he still has to exit the simulation every day to go work a job and pay for their access to the fantasy. Had he just done that in the first place, Alice wouldn't have had to work extra shifts, and she wouldn't have been so exhausted all the time, and they could have had a flourishing relationship in the real world. He wouldn't have had to lie to her. They would have just worked it out together, because she did love him, and he did love her. But ultimately, he made some bad choices because he was insecure and fell to the honeysuckle words of Chris Pine's character. So instead, he chooses a fantasy and doesn't give Alice the opportunity to say no. It's this message that lines up with the invitation. They're not one for one. They are not. But there's a fair amount of them that do line up enough. So specifically, a man making a choice for a woman to have a better life. A better life. So Evie in the invitation would have had immortality, wealth, and power. And Alice could have gone back to being happy and being taken care of. And don't worry, darling. But neither of them were asked if that's what they wanted. They were told that that's what they would get. Ultimately, they both rebel because what is life worth if you don't get to choose for yourself what your life is? The difference in the two films is that one is more open revolution and the other is more peaceful protest. Don't Worry, Darling simply provides the situation and lets the audience come to their own decision. It is more subtle. It's still a bit more heavy-handed than Get Out was, but far superior to telling your audience how to think, which is what The Invitation did. So I hope it's not getting too political here, but this was a well-done movie. It's a message that has political connotations to it, but it's very important to the plot and the story itself, and the plot and the story and the acting and the directing supported it in a way that just presents it to the audience and lets the audience determine what to do with that information. So this is a movie I would recommend seeing if you get the opportunity. You can either go see it in theaters or wait for it to come out on HBO Max, which I'm sure it will do in like a month or two. But it is an enjoyable film. I do plan to watch it again, actually, which is always a good sign. You know, you don't want to watch bad movies again. So I do plan to watch it again to see if I can come up with any more clues and make any more connections to see if some of those those ambiguous clues can be fit in. But I will end this video here. Thank you again for watching. We will be back next week with another video. I hope to see you soon. But until then, enjoy your days, enjoy your weeks, enjoy your evenings. Tell your friends about us. Like the video, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.